Hi, it's Jake here. Today we're going to be changing the oil on a 2004 Honda Odyssey, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. It's really quite simple as long as you have a few basic tools. You can do it yourself and save a lot of money during the process. So the first thing you want to do when you change the oil, especially on a cold day like today when it's 30 degrees out and the oil's moving real slow in the engine, is you want to start your car and warm your engine up. You can take it for a drive or just let it idle for a good 10 minutes or so. Get that oil moving through and just warmed up. So let's get going. Okay, so we're going to get this car warmed up. I'm going to take it for a quick spin and then we'll get this project going. Alright, so I'm back from my drive. I got the car on the ramps. If you don't have ramps, if you have a higher curb, you can get your car a little higher and then you can get on the other side of the curb. Just be careful, make sure there's no traffic where you're going to be changing your oil. But what I like to do when I get back from my drive is make sure the operating temperature is about normal. That way you know that oil is going to be nice and warm and it's going to flow out smoothly when you're draining it. So you only need a few things for this. It's really quite simple. You need 5W20 synthetic oil, extended life, high mileage oil filter. You're going to need an oil wrench. You're also going to need a socket set, drain pan just to get the old oil out of the car and drain it into that, some ramps, and also on that jug over there I like to put the old oil in that and bring it in for recycling. So the first thing you're going to do after you got your car on its ramps and you got it high enough off the ground so you can scooch underneath this front end here, is you're going to pull up your oil stick there. You're going to undo your cap. Just make sure to set your cap in a safe area so when you go to fill it up again, you won't lose it. I usually like to put it on top of my engine up here. That way I know it's there. You're gonna need a 17mm socket for this specific car. Obviously, if you have a different vehicle, always refer to your owner's manual. And what we're gonna do is just take off that oil plug next, drain that oil, and we'll go from there. I like to use a creeper when I get under vehicles. It's a little bit more comfortable. You can get these at Harbor Freight for fairly good deal. If you don't have something like this, a good alternative is just some good old cardboard. So unfold it, lie on that, keep yourself from getting all dirty. Okay, so we're under the car here. Here's our oil plug. You can see that. I got my 17mm socket here. And I always like to have a rag close by, so when you spill any oil at all, you can wipe it off on your arm or on the ground. I got my oil drain pan below it. And when you're draining this out, make sure it's just a little ways back because the oil usually comes back and it shoots further off into that drain pan there. So we're just gonna put our socket on there. Give it a little breaking loose there. Yeah, once you break it loose, it's pretty easy to get off. You can set your socket aside. You're just gonna unscrew that. I like to wear gloves so I don't get oil all over my skin. I actually have a pair of gloves underneath these gloves too, just as a precautionary. And if this is kind of hard to get off, you can always take the socket and just put it on there by hand and slowly turn it off. This one's coming off real easy, so I'm just turning it by hand. I like to turn it nice and slow. That way when the oil starts to come out, you can grab it before it falls into the pan. Alright. You see how far that's kind of going back there? I'll let it drain for a little bit. That's why we open up that oil on the top of the engine, the oil cap, and that way that oil comes out of there pretty fast and it comes out there smoothly. You're just going to let that drain until it's just slightly dripping. Once it's slightly dripping, then we can move on to the oil filter. Okay, once that oil is slightly dripping there, we're going to move on over to, you can kind of see that through there. Yeah. We're going to move on to our oil filter, which is right back there. You can kind of see it through that little crack right there. So I got my oil filter wrench here. Just got to give it a few slight turns, get that broken loose, because it creates a pretty good vacuum and seals that up after you put your new one on. So I like to get these oil wrenches. You can get these fairly cheap for maybe, I don't know, $10 or so from Walmart or AutoZone, and they're excellent to get these things off. So you just get it loose like that. I like to get my rag close to my arm, and you can just start to twist it off. Do it slowly. You don't want it to fall and drop in your oil pan and get oil all over everything. I like to break it loose, let most of the oil out. You'll just have a little top layer of oil come off. It doesn't take too long. Let that drip out for a little bit there. It'll run out. At the same time, I still have my oil plug open and it's still slightly dripping. That way you can get all the oil out. Alright, once it kind of slowly stops, you can just put your hand below it, turn it slowly. And just when you get close to the end of those threads, always turn it slowly. Sometimes it can drop out and splash and it gets all over your clothes. So once you're close here, you'll feel it. It'll drop into your hand, just like that. You're just going to tilt it over the oil pan, drain the rest of the oil in. This is why I like to have this rag close by. You can wipe off any excess oil on your arm or gloves. Just going to wipe that off. Keep it from getting all over as I get out of the car here, from underneath the car. Okay, and we're going to grab our new one. Alright, so I got my oil plug out here. I got a new crushed gasket. You want to take your old gasket off and replace that each time you do your draining. What can happen if you don't? You can strip your threads and then you have to put a new oil pan in. So I always like to use a new crushed gasket. They don't cost much, they're like $1 or less. So you're just going to put that on. We're going to set that aside. We're going to take our new oil filter out. Okay, so we have our oil filter out. And these will always have a little bit different shape depending on which manufacturer you buy them from. As long as you get the correct one that's designed for your model, it's okay if they're a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. I know the Honda ones are usually about this size as well. This is an STP. But what you're going to do is always an important part of oil changing. You take a little bit of your fresh oil, just kind of dip your finger in there a little bit, get that fresh oil. Then right around the seal, you're just going to take it, rub a little layer on that seal. And what that does is when you hand tighten it on, it's going to create a nice, close, tight seal against the engine and it'll keep it from leaking. So always take a little fresh oil and just rub it around the rim of that gasket there. Alright, so I got it slightly on there. We're just going to turn it all the way on until it stops. Just make sure your gloves don't have oil when you're putting your new one on because it's going to get really slick. So I wipe my gloves off first. We're just going to take it, get as tight as you can. And that's all you need. Alright, so you're going to take your oil plug, you got your new crushed gasket on there, you're going to thread it on by hand, just kind of get that on there. Just spin it down as far as you can get it. Alright, once you got a little tight, I usually push my oil back and wipe everything down. Get that old oil off of there to make sure it's clean, doesn't drip all over the place. Then you're going to take your socket, you're going to reverse it for tightening. Just put it on your plug. Sometimes you kind of have to hold the socket a little bit so it tightens up. This is very important. Once you get to this step here, as soon as you feel that tight, you just want to give it a snug. You don't want it really tight, but as soon as you feel that pressure there, Just going to give it a little tap. And that's all you need. You don't want to over tighten it. You're going to strip those threads if you do. So it's always a good thing just to give it just a little bit of a snug, not too much, but just enough. And that will be perfect. Okay, so we got the hard part done. We're going to put the oil in next. You're going to need a little funnel. You can get a cheap funnel from pretty much anywhere, Harbor Freight, AutoZone, Napa. Few dollars just to get something to keep that oil from spilling on the rest of your engine. This Honda is going to take 4.6 quarts. Obviously you want to refer to your owner's manual for proper specifications. Like I said in the beginning, I like to use 5W20 synthetic just to get that extra a couple thousand miles, so about 5,000 miles off of each oil change. And that's what I like to use. Obviously you can use just standard oil and for every 3,000 mile oil changes. This is what I like to use, and once you switch, typically you want to stay with the synthetic. So we're just going to dump it in. You're going to want to check that as you go along. So in these big 5-quart jugs, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 5. So we know it's right about 4.5, right in this area here. 4.6, 4.5, pretty darn close, right in that area right there. Just a little top off there, just make sure we got just enough. All right, and that's about 4.6 quarts right there, and we're done. All right, so we're gonna put this back on, make sure that's tight, and we're gonna make sure our dipstick is back in place, and that's it. You've successfully done your own oil change yourself and saved a lot of money. Now we're gonna move on. We're gonna change the air filter. We're gonna get that nice and freshened up. So we be good for another 15,000 miles, and won't have to worry about that for a while. So I like to use a 8mm little extension on my socket. You can use, get close in here, you can use a Phillips screwdriver. If you have a longer one, you can use that. I like to use the socket. It's a little easier. Let's pop it on. There's going to be 4 screws around the side. Just going to loosen those up. And this one's a little tight space. It's kind of hard to get in there. That's why I like to use a socket or a long Phillips screwdriver. Just makes it a little easier to get in there. And sometimes, like this little square, you can see it doesn't go in there very good. So you're gonna have to take a Phillips screwdriver and finish off the rest. Okay, so I leave my screws in there. I don't take them out all the way. I just leave them partially out, as you can kind of see here. Just as long as they're loose enough to where you can get this open all the way. That's all you need. All right, we're just gonna take that, lift it up. If you feel any pressure, those means that screws are not fully out. You just give it a little extra turn. And you got those screws fully out. Really doesn't take much. All you have to do is lift up just a little bit, and you can kind of see on this filter, it shows you there's an upside and then there's a downside. And on that little filter you can see that it shows and up. I don't know if you can see that there, but out on the top of the filter it shows up. So it only goes in one way, and it's form fitted to this vehicle. So you just lift up, take it out. It's really not too dirty. There's some bugs, a few little things in there. It's important to keep your engine clean, so you always want to change this about every 15,000 miles. So we're going to take our new filter. It's going to look exactly the same as the other one. It's going to have that same up section right there. That typically goes in the front of your air intake. So you can just lift that back up, slide it into position to make sure it's seated all the way around. And you're going to take your hands on both sides, just reposition it, make sure it's seated all the way around, and you're just going to tighten these screws back up. What I like to do is just tighten them until it just starts to get a little bit tighter, but not all the way. Go all the way around on 4 sides. And after you've gotten all 4 sides partially tightened, I like to take my socket again and go diagonal. We're just going to tighten there. Tighten there. And that way you get a nice even pressure all the way around your air filter. And that's it. That's all you have to do to change an air filter on a 2004 Honda Odyssey.